I'm Mo. It is October 17th, and I haven't even started filling you in on all the books that I've read so far in October. I haven't actually read that much. I've only completed 7 books so far this month, which is low for me. I was trying to do a 30 and 30 last month. I read 24 books in September, so I think slowing down in my reading is natural. When I have read a lot of books in one month, I often read less books the next. So it's definitely time to do another vlog style monthly reading wrap up. And I try to talk for only about 5 minutes for each book. I try to tell you something about the book, something that I noticed in the book, whether I liked it, if I think you should read it too. And I try to talk as close to when I've read the books as I possibly can. Obviously, some months I do better on that, some months I do worse. And then I take all those clips and I link them together vlog style, and it turns out to be a super long wrap up. So here we go. The first book that I finished in October was When We Cease to Understand the World. This is by Benjamin Labatut. This was translated, why doesn't it say? Oh, translated by Adrian Nathan West. This is a very short, even kind of shorter than it looks, because it's not told in vignettes, but it's told in little stories, kind of story chapters about different scientists. The idea of this book is almost like an alternate history. So it's about different scientists, real life scientists, but it kind of delves into more cosmic, more sci-fi elements than were realistically dived into by these scientists. And it shows connections throughout time with different scientists and with different events in the world. Now, I read this in the very beginning of October. I already can't remember barely any of the scientists in it. I already can't remember what some of the events were, what some of the sci-fi elements were, but I do remember really, really liking it and it being like a very engaging read while I was listening to it. I did listen to this one on audio, and I'm glad that I did because it is a little dense in the science aspect part. Not being a scientist, not being super familiar with scientists, I think it would have been hard for me to get into physically, so I think reading it on audio was perfect, and I just really liked the vibe of it. I would say that this book is pretty much all vibes. I really liked the cadence, I really liked the writing, and the translation, I guess, and I thought it was really an interesting idea, this kind of alternate history idea done in this little piece, and taking a small subject, which is really these scientists, and transforming them, rethinking them, reimagining them. So I did really enjoy it. I think it's one that I would definitely revisit and read again. I could see this being actually kind of like a comfort read, even though there's a lot of like kind of gruesome stuff in here and unsettling things, and science can often be like messy and, you know, gory and gross. This is not like by any means like a horror, or there's not body horror, just the natural kind of path of science can sometimes be like that. So yeah, I could kind of almost picture maybe reading it again and again and getting like more out of it. It did also make me want to research some of the scientists to find out what some of the true aspects of this book were, because it's obviously based on real people. It's obviously based on some real events and some things that they actually did. So it would be interesting to see if I could do research and like dissect some of the actual things from some of the reimagined things. That being said, I haven't done that yet. So how much did it really influence me to do that? I mean, it did, and one day maybe I will. The next book that I finished in October was The Impossible Fortune, which is the fifth in the Thursday Murder Club series by Richard Osmanng. So I really love this series. I love series about octogenarians. One of my favorite series that I discovered last year is the Mrs. Polifax series. If you like Richard Osmann, I would definitely suggest picking up the Mrs. Polifax series. So the Thursday Murder Club is about a collection of people who are all brought together by 4 octogenarians living in their retirement village, living in their old folks' home, because these 4 people have the Thursday Murder Club, which is a meeting that they have every Thursday where they work on cold cases. And in the first book, called The Thursday Murder Club, we meet these 4 characters and we see how they react when a real live murder occurs. And these 4 characters, hey, quit it. These 4 characters all have skills and all have aspects of their life and all have aspects of their personality which come together to help them solve crimes. They also are really good at like gathering people together with them. So throughout the books, we see them gathering kind of a crew of people around them, some good people, some bad people, some people who are out to get them, some people who are out to help them. They inevitably all work together in some ways to solve crimes. Andre. In the 5th in this series, we're seeing the aftermath of some of the things that happen in the 4th book, and the 4th book is like notoriously very, very sad, and I did cry like the first half of the 5th book because things kept coming up and I kept remembering things from the 4th book, and it was so sad. I like sobbed at the 4th book. I like laid in bed and sobbed when the book was over. Something to be warned if you've read all 4 books, that the 5th book definitely is sad, at least in the beginning, but good things come out of it. And there's always things in this book that you know are going to show up in the next book. So there's definitely hints of relationships and different groups of people coming together and different ideals and ideas and villains and all sorts of things that is going to continue on in future Thursday Murder Club books. Overall, I thought this was a little bit of a joiner book. I did really enjoy it, but it did kind of feel a little bit filler for the series. Like, we did need to see the aftermath of things that happened in the 4th book. We did need to heal some relationships of people who were maybe at odds in some of the other books. We did need to see the gang back in their real life in a way. So I did think it was a little bit of a filler book. It was a little obvious. Like, not all the books are super obvious to me, but this one was a little obvious. But overall, another great installment, and I really did enjoy it. And if you're this far, like, why would you stop? The next book that I finished in October is The Diving Bell and the Butterfly by Jean-Dominique Bauby. This is a nonfiction book told in all little vignettes by Bauby, in his own words, by his own creation. This was translated from the French by Jeremy Leggett. Bauby was a magazine editor and suffered a severe and sudden medical emergency that left him with a locked-in syndrome. So this is a true story. This is a nonfiction of Bauby's time being completely aware, completely mentally healthy and sane and able, but he is completely locked into his body. He can only blink like one eye. He can only very vaguely, after time and after therapy, move his head from side to side, and he communicates this whole book by blinking one eye. He can't talk, he can't eat on his own, he can't use the bathroom on his own, he can't get up, obviously, he can't do any of that stuff, and he writes this whole book with his assistant blinking his one eye. So they come up with an alphabet or a way of organizing the alphabet to make it the most easy for him, and he has to write this book one letter at a time, and the transcriber has to transcribe it one letter at a time, make edits by talking to him and listening to him through this one letter at a time method of communication. The interesting thing about this book is it doesn't dwell a lot on the medical incident on the day of his becoming locked in. It doesn't dwell a lot on his health or anything like that. It really talks about his life now. It has some remembrances to his past life, and certainly like in the instances of his children, how he felt about them before and like how he feels about them now, and how his life is obviously completely changed and how their life is completely changed, how his wife's life is completely changed. But it talks more about his like day to day, his like minute to minute feelings and reactions to things, his thought process on his life now. And it was really, really interesting. It was definitely sad. It was definitely depressing. It was definitely fascinating. This book was written, I believe, in the 90s. Yes, 1997. So who knows what medical advancements there have been? Who knows what a person with this syndrome would be dealing with now, or how they might be communicating or not. And one thing that Bauby doesn't explain probably because he doesn't know, is like how they knew that he could communicate that he was totally sane. There is a little bit of explanation of how they realized that he was aware of what was going on, but it really makes you wonder how many people they don't catch that are aware and who have locked-in syndrome, who they don't know are still living full lives in their minds, even though they can't move or speak or react to things. So it was really, really interesting. It's extremely short, and the book ends on kind of the first year of his time in the hospital. So you don't get a lot of information, but sadly, the author did die shortly after writing this book, not due to his medical condition entirely, but due to pneumonia or getting sick in some other way in the hospital. So I'm sure that his condition did lend to his death, but it wasn't the reason or the cause of his death. So it was really interesting. They made a movie of it. Michel Gondry, I think, was the director, and I would be interested to see that. Like, I can't even imagine how the movie goes because this person literally can't do anything except blink one eye. So it must be a very interesting film. But it is kind of considered like a modern classic film, and this is definitely a well-loved and highly touted nonfiction book, so I was glad to have read it. The next book that I finished in October was Murder on the Links by Agatha Christie. This is the second in the Poirot series. I've only read one other Poirot, which was the first in the Poirot series, so that worked out well in my favor, which was The Mysterious Affair at Styles. I think that's what that first one's called. I love Agatha Christie, and I do read a lot of the Miss Marple books. I've also read two of the Tommy and Tuppence books, and I have also read And Then There Were None. So I have read quite a bit of Agatha Christie. I just haven't read that much Poirot. The reason that I read this, though, was because I went to see an adaptation of this book as a play with my dad. So it was really interesting because there were things in the play that I thought for sure would be in the book, which weren't. There were things in the play which I thought for sure wouldn't be in the book, which were. And I thought they did a really good job of adapting it because they made a very large cast. Murder on the Links has a very large cast. It's a Hastings book into a very small cast for the stage play. They really streamlined a lot of things, and they really made it a very accessible story for those who know Poirot and for those who don't know Poirot. The book, I think, it's hard to say because I read the book so close to the play, and because the play was so streamlined, and because the play, I think, did a really good job of that. I would say that the book is not her best. I would say that there's far too many characters. I would say that the mystery isn't very satisfying. I would say that there's some aspects of it that play on the worst of Agatha Christie, like a little bit of racism, although there's kind of a tongue-in-cheek part about racism in this, which is highlighted. I don't know. I have mixed feelings about the book. This book really made me think that I don't love Poirot as much as I thought I did, and I'm not going to love his books as much as I thought I would. I do love Poirot. I have watched so many of the adaptations. I've seen so many of the Scream adaptations, the TV adaptations, the BBC adaptations, and I really, really love him. But I don't know, he's just not as good as Miss Marple. So it was a little bit of a letdown after watching the play, because the play was really good. But then there were things that I was like, oh, this is definitely from the book. And then the play had just inserted them, and I was like, wow, that went along with Christie, but I'm sorry that they did that. So I will probably revisit this when I do eventually read all the Poirot books. I do plan on rereading The Mysterious Affair at Styles. I don't think I'll be doing that anytime soon. So I think I'm going to finish Miss Marple, then Tommy and Tuppence, then read her standalones, then do Poirot. So it'll be a little while. But I would say, out of the Agatha Christie's that I've read this year, this was one of the worst ones. The next book that I finished in October was Spring Garden by Tomoka Shibasaki. This is a Japanese translated work, and it was translated by Polly Barton. This is the first Shibasaki book that I've read, and I really, really enjoyed it. It follows Taro, who is recently divorced and living in a kind of crumbling apartment building in an area of Tokyo that is getting a lot of attention because all the old buildings are falling apart and getting torn down, and they're building new high-rise buildings, new modern fancy buildings. And he chooses this kind of crumbling building because it's easy. Like, he wants to do the path of least resistance a lot of the time about a lot of things in his life. He likes the apartment okay. He doesn't really make friends there. He's been there for a couple of years now when he starts to notice other people in the building, and particularly one woman, Nishi, who one day asks if she can go into his apartment. She wants to go into his apartment because she's like obsessed with the house next door, and she's always trying to see different angles of it. So he starts to notice more and more that she's really obsessed with this house, and then one day she explains to him why she is. And the rest of the book is kind of Taro and Nishi's relationship to the apartment building and this house, to each other, to the people around them, the idea of old versus new, the idea of holding on to things that are like sacred to you or dear to you, what happens when those things are objects that are going to, you know, fade or be demolished, or etc., etc. We kind of see this a lot through Taro's perspective, because he is such a passive person, because he is a person who doesn't want to do the extra work, go the extra mile. We kind of see it from an apathetic lens. And then there is a brief part of this book where it's told from Taro's sister's perspective, which is a very Japanese thing and Korean thing to do. Like, you're going along the whole book, it's all one perspective, and then all of a sudden there's like a little perspective of someone else who you don't necessarily expect. And I think that's interesting in this book, particularly because Taro is an apathetic character in a lot of ways, and because he is a passive character. So it's interesting to see someone who's not passive, who's like very measured and very much going to do what they want to achieve a goal, which is kind of Nishi's perspective too. We see it through the sister's perspective. We don't ever get Nishi's perspective, but it does kind of let us into the mindset of someone like Nishi and like the sister. So I thought it was really interesting. I really liked it a lot. This is one I could definitely see revisiting, definitely one I'll be keeping on my shelves. I thought it was very pretty, very beautifully written. It had a lot of things that I love in life and in books. Like, I love houses. I totally understand the feeling of loss, of something being demolished. The other day I went past a place that I always go past that has these beautiful pine trees. They ripped all the pine trees out. Like, I feel so devastated when things like that happen, so I understand some of the perspective in this book and some of the idea of loss that is felt when something old gets destroyed and something important to some people get destroyed. So I really, really love this one. The next book was a reread for me. It was Queen of the Damned by Anne Rice. So this is the third in the Vampire Chronicles series, and I read Interview with the Vampire a couple years ago. Since I've been on BookTube, reread. I've read that many times. I love that book. I love that movie. Yeah, I was obsessed with it back in the day. And then I reread The Vampire Lestat earlier this year, and I decided that I wanted to move on to the next in the series, The Queen of the Damned. And it popped up on Libby on audio, read by Simon Vance. So it hadn't been there previously, and they reacquired it, or it became available to my library. So I went ahead and read this one. This one is super long. It's like a 21-hour audio book, and because it's Simon Vance, because he's so good, you can't really up the speed that much. So it did take me a very long time to get through this book, but I did want to reread it. I don't own a physical copy of this one. I think when I was cleaning out my basement box books, I had a copy, and I got rid of it because I wasn't planning on rereading the entire series at that point. But this is one that, like, I'm sure I can find again. Interview with the Vampire, if you are unfamiliar with it, is just that. It is a book written as an interview with a vampire. So there is a vampire, Louis, who is a fairly young vampire. He was created by the vampire Lestat, and he tells his tale to a young reporter, David. And then that book shows the events of Louis's life, how he met Lestat, how he became a vampire, what their life was like together. And then in the next book, it's kind of Lestat's reaction to Louis's book, because their stories vary, like, pretty drastically. Louis and Lestat have very different perspectives, very different ideas on what happened to them since they've been together. And in The Vampire Lestat, we also see Lestat's history, and we come to understand some of the greater history of vampires as a whole. In The Queen of the Damned, it kind of picks up, well, it picks up exactly where The Vampire Lestat leaves us, and we see the events that happen leading up to the end of The Vampire Lestat from different perspectives, and we see what happens like during and after those events. But it's all wrapped up in the history of the vampires and the Queen of the Damned. Interview with the Vampire is like long and meandering, beautiful, but like almost perfect. Everything in it, even though sometimes it feels a little drawn out, is good. And you want to know it. And it becomes relevant and important, certainly, but it's like told by Louis, and it has this very captivating feel to it, even when it's long, even when it's a little boring. The Vampire Lestat feels too long. It feels like there's too much history. There's too much going on. Too much was trying to be squeezed into one book. It's very dry in places. It's very boring in places. But in Queen of the Damned, so much of that comes back. Even by the end of The Vampire Lestat, I thought it was worth it. But having now read Queen of the Damned, it was definitely worth it because you really needed all this information, and it really is setting you up for future books. So I will continue on with the series. I think I've only read these 3 books and The Vampire Armand, but The Vampire Armand takes place way later and is way later in the series. So I don't know if I didn't know that when I was a kid or if I didn't care, but I'm excited to read these kind of all in order because they are all building on each other, and so many of the characters that we are introduced to in every book are coming back and are grouped together, and you do want to find out what happens to them. I read Interview with the Vampire and The Vampire Lestat physically. I would have read Queen of the Damned physically, I guess, but I did really love the Simon Vance book, so if you're interested in reading them on audio, and Simon Vance does all or some of them, I would definitely suggest that because he's amazing. And I think I would read the next one however it came to me. If I get a physical copy, I'll read that. If I don't, I'll try to find an audiobook, but not many of the other audiobooks are around. Now, the TV show I've heard is really good. When I first started to watch the Interview with the Vampire TV show, I didn't really love it. I think because I'm so used to the movie and I'm so used to the book, but it seems like the first season of the TV show followed the first book. The second season of the TV show, which is coming out now, which is The Vampire Lestat, which is like Lestat as a rock star, is following the second book. So I would be really interested to watch the first season, to get to the second season, and then see the Queen of the Damned season. Also, obviously, there is a notorious Queen of the Damned movie with Aaliyah, R.I.P. And that one I remember being, I mean, everybody hated it, everybody panned it, but I remember it being like fun and good and beautiful. But now, having reread the book, I don't know what that movie could be about. So I would love to actually revisit that movie as well. The last book that I've read so far in October is Friday Black by Nana Kwame Adjei-Brenyah. Nana Kwame Adjei-Brenyah. These are short stories, and this is Adjei-Brenyah's first book, I believe. He also wrote Chain Gang All-Stars, which I didn't put together that was the same author at all. I don't know why, but I have that book too, and it definitely made me excited to read that after I finished reading this. This is a collection of quite a few short stories, and they mostly revolve around now or the near future, in some cases a little bit further into the future, and about like societal problems and how societal problems are kind of like magnified in this near future. Most of the stories follow different people. A few of the stories follow the same people, and a lot of them have to do with just racism, with class discrepancy, with prejudices, with the Black experience, with security state, with tracking and Big Brother observation, like all things that we deal with today, just like kind of magnified in this future time. A lot of the stories have to do with retail retail and working retail, which, you know, I love stories about any kind of service industry. I worked retail for many years, so I definitely understand where the main characters are coming from a lot of times in this, and the kind of customer mindset and the insanity of things like Black Friday, overconsumption and consumerism, and all of that stuff. And it was just really, really interesting. I liked a lot of it. There were some stories that I really, really liked. There were some that dragged a little, but every story I thought was really interestingly done, had an interesting voice, and said something about consumerism and capitalism and all the other things that I mentioned. I liked that some of them were connected. I felt like maybe a little bit some of the stories were repetitive because they were connected, but I could see even that being part of like maybe a larger collection. All of these stories seem like complete stories. All of these stories didn't seem like unfinished or half-baked. They definitely felt well thought out, well planned out. Maybe multiple stories were the same story but from different aspects, kind of. But I would say that all these stories are super bleak. All these stories are dark. All of these stories are depressing. So it did take me a little while to get through this one, and I did take some breaks. And I'm sure his full-length novel, Chain Gang All-Stars, is the same, because that has to do with like the prison state in the near future, which I'm sure he has a lot to say about. But I really liked it, and I think that I could definitely see myself revisiting some of these stories, especially after reading some of his other work. And I look forward to reading Chain Gang All-Stars, and I look forward to reading his future work as well. So those were the first 7 books that I've read so far in October, and when I read some more, I will let you know. It is November 6th, and I have not finished wrapping up my October reading. I talked about the first 7 books, and then it's been a really long time, but I only read 5 more books. I only read 12 books in October. Not that that means only, because that's still a lot of books to read in 1 month. The next book that I read in October was Spread Me by Sarah Gailey. This is the 4th Sarah Gailey that I have read, and I think it is my 2nd favorite. I really liked this very strange sci-fi. So this is a sci-fi book, and it takes place in the future where the world has been like ravaged by many pandemics and epidemics and bacteria and various viruses and things, and now the climate is really bad and the weather is even harsher, and our main character, whose name is Kinsey, is a scientist, and she takes a placement in a very remote, very hot, very hostile, very isolated desert location to do research on the desert. And this is far enough in the future where like climate change is really bad, and the corporations are hiring people to look into different locations to try and like terraform or try to build factories and things like that. So she is doing that research, and we see in the very beginning of the book them finding something in the desert and bringing it into their like Kwanzaa hut, like bringing it into their facility when they know that they should not be. So Kinsey and her team kind of know they're doing the wrong thing, but they're all kind of compelled to bring this specimen in. And then there's more to the specimen than meets the eye, and we see glimpses of what happens after they bring this specimen in, as well as glimpses of the past. So it goes one chapter, which I usually don't like, but I thought it worked well here, of Kinsey assembling her team to work in this remote location, of her reasons why she wants to work in this remote location, of her getting to know the rest of her team. And there's a lot of casual queerness in this. There's non-binary characters. Sarah Gailey is a non-binary author. I love that Sarah Gailey, even in this very short book, even in very short chapters, really makes you feel for each character, gives you the vibe of each character, but also makes you relate to them and enjoy their character. Whether you like that person or not, you really get a lot of character development. And so this was a really interesting dynamic between Kinsey and her team, and then this specimen, and how bringing this specimen into their facility changes things for them. And then it definitely does get weird, and there definitely is a sexual element to this that you don't initially think of when you think of the title, but then when you read it, you're like, oh. So I really, really liked this one. I loved getting to know all the characters. It was scary. There was some body horror. There was some isolation horror. There was some nods and mentions to a certain movie where people are being plagued by a specimen that comes into their research facility, which I have not actually ever seen, but definitely want to see after reading this. I can't do it right now though because my husband's away. I need to do it when I have people around me because it's supposedly a very, very, very scary movie. So yeah, I really, really loved this one. I loved the character development. I loved the relationships of all the different people, and then the kind of weird sci-fi twist was really interesting, and I think it was also an interesting take on climate fiction and cli-fi and climate science fiction. So I would definitely highly recommend, as long as you're not squeamish about germs, as long as you're not squeamish about sex, as long as you're not squeamish about horror, I would definitely highly recommend this one. The next book that I finished in October was The Fox Wife by Yang Chu. Yang Chu is one of my favorite authors. I think I've read 3 books now by her, and I just love her work. They're all historical fiction, and they mix Chinese and Malaysian folklore and fairy tale. The Fox Wife also has Japanese fairy tale and folklore and history, and these all do have history and talk about the relationship between all these countries. There's always a slight mystery element through them. There's always some supernatural elements, whether those are ghostly or otherworldly or whether they're religious supernatural elements. And in The Fox Wife, we are following Snow, who is our main character. She is a fox. I think it's pretty obvious and very much not a spoiler to say that she is a fox who can turn into a woman and who can take on a female human body form. And she is seeking revenge for a terrible thing that was done to her and her family. So we see her on her journey. She's kind of all consumed by this revenge journey, and this leads her to go to Japan with various people and potentially some other foxes hiding in human form. And then we also see an older man who has become a detective, and he is looking for a woman who supposedly can turn into a fox, and he is trying to investigate some mysterious deaths that have happened, and he's worried that this woman who can turn into a fox might have had something to do with several deaths. So we see these 2 paths. It's not chapter. It is quite a bit from Snow, and through Snow's story we see her current day, we see her past, we come to understand what it is and what has caused her to go on this revenge mission. We meet many various characters, and then with our detective in the other perspective, we see him and his past. We learn about connections that he has made between foxes and other things in life, in his life, and in the investigative nature of his job that he's been doing. And then of course there's lots of overlap and overlay of people, of characters, of things, and eventually the storylines come together in the end. And a lot of her books are like that, and a lot of them have really interesting dual perspective, or because these are told in omnipotent perspectives for the most part. I think Snow's perspective in here is first person, but the detective's is omnipotent. We do make those connections as the reader that the characters are not making yet, and we do know some more information, which I enjoy, and I really like this one. It took me a long time to read it. I kind of read half of it and then stopped. I had other things that I wanted to read and other things that I wanted to do, but I also wasn't feeling it. And then when I came back to it, I totally was. So I do think that because these are quite lyrical and poetic, and because they use a lot of language of the cultures that they're talking about and a lot of references to the cultures that they're talking about, you do need to pay a little bit of attention. Also because the storylines are a little bit convoluted and a little bit interconnected, and there are some areas where they come together or break apart that you do need to pay attention. So I do think you have to be in the right mood for Yang Chu's work, but I think that reading them on audio, which I've read all her books on audio so far, but I do own physical copies of them as well, is the best way to do it, because Yang Chu reads her books herself, and she does such a wonderful job of, 1, making all those connections and everything clear, but 2, portraying the characters and the emotion of the characters and the motivations of the characters through her reading. I think this one Well, I don't know. I really loved all of her books. I'd like to go back and read them again, maybe before I rank them. I definitely look forward to more of her books coming out. If you like whimsical, fairy tale, folklore, if you like historical fiction, if you like stories where women are really coming into their own and are gaining power and taking power from societies that maybe see them as lesser, all her books have themes of that as well. Interpersonal relationships, connections, familial connections. If you like any of those things, I would definitely check out her work. It's so good. The next book that I finished in October was Silk by Alessandro Barrica, and this is translated from the Italian by Guido Waldman. This is a very short book which is told in these very short chapters, almost vignette style, where sometimes they're half a page, sometimes they're less than half a page, sometimes they're 2 pages, and it tells the story Herve, I'm not sure how you pronounce that in Italian or in French, who is a silk merchant. He lives in a very small town in Italy, and he goes and buys the silkworms from various places. So at first he starts out buying them in India and Africa, and then he has to go further and further afield because of sickness in the silkworms and because of various different reasons that it's harder to get the silkworm eggs. So we see him, and he lives his quiet life. He loves his wife. He loves his quiet routine of going out at the end of the year, traveling to these far-flung lands, getting the silkworm eggs, bringing them back to his village where the whole economy revolves around silk. So he's the person who buys the eggs. Then there's kind of like a mayor type figure who pulls all the strings, gets him to go buy the eggs, instructs him where to go and how much to buy, and then the rest of the town makes the silk. So he brings the egg back, and the whole town makes silk and are silk creators and sellers, and this is how the town survives and thrives. But as our main character has to go further and further afield, his travels take him to Japan, another book about Japan where people are traveling to Japan, where no one is really traveling. There is like an embargo on trade with Japan, and there is unrest between the different cultures and the different places, and it's an incredibly long and hard journey. It takes months and months to get there, and we see our main character traveling on this. And then throughout this book, we find out why he continues to go back to Japan and why he continues to buy eggs from Japan, even though he may be able to get them from somewhere else. And it's really, really short, obviously, and it's told in a very fairy tale way. It reminded me a lot of Italo Calvino's writing. It reminded me a lot of Invisible Cities and The Baron in the Trees, with the way that it was repetitive and lyrical, short, and every time that our main character travels, we see the same passages happening again and again, maybe with only slight variation. There is several sort of kind of love affairs and love stories throughout this, which remind me of The Baron in the Trees, and just the way that it's historical fiction, but told in a very fairy tale-esque way. It also reminded me of that Jose Sagamara book. What was that called? The Tale of the Unknown Island by Jose Sagamara, that was translated by Margaret Jull Costa. Similar to Baron in the Trees, that one leans more towards fairy tale and more exotic or bizarre storytelling, but they all have a similar kind of vibe, a moral to impart, a storytelling style that I really enjoyed. I have had this on my shelf for a long time, and I've always been interested in it, but I'm so glad that I read it because I really, really loved it. I loved the feeling of it, and I loved some of the reveals, and I loved some of the dynamic between the townspeople, and I just thought it was really, really interesting, so I would highly recommend. And it's obviously very, very short. The next book that I read in October is Hot for Slayer by Ali Hazelwood. Now, I have read several Ali Hazelwoods. One long novel, The Love Hypothesis, and 2 short stories, and this is the 3rd, I think. And I much, much prefer her short stories, and I enjoyed Hot for Slayer. It is a vampire romance, and our main character is a very old vampire, but who is kind of young at heart, and she's just trying to live her life. She's trying to not eat good people. She only eats bad people. She's trying to only eat when she absolutely needs to, only hunt when she absolutely needs to, because she still has her humanity. humanity, and she loves humans, and she loves life. Unfortunately, she does have a ancient nemesis, a slayer, whose whole purpose in life is to destroy her bloodline. So we see glimpses of her and this slayer fighting and popping into each other's lives over time, running from each other. But at the current moment and in the present day of this story, she is pretty settled in New York, and her life only gets upheaved when another vampire moves in on her territory. This leads her and the slayer to come in contact again, and through that we see their backstories, we see their relationship, and we find out where their relationship might go in the future. So it's a very, very short story. I think it was only like an hour and a half. I read it on audio. I did really like it. Someone, I think it was Allie Do I Read, Allie Do Is Read, who said that the narrator's accent sounded fake, and it does. She's doing a British accent, and it is pretty bad, but once I got used to it, I liked it, and actually once other characters came into it and she did other voices, I liked that more as well. I will keep reading Allie Hazelwood's short work, but I don't think I would read a long novel from her. I don't see the need for a long novel. I just like her kind of short, well-contained short stories. The last book that I finished in October is Brain on Fire, My Month of Madness by Susanna Cahalan. This is a nonfiction book about Susanna's time when she had a brain infection and seemingly went mad. There is a part of this book that is leading up to her diagnosis and her finding out what it is that is making her crazy. But I think it's not a spoiler to say what it is that causes her madness, because one, the stakes are fairly low. She wrote this book afterwards, so you do know you're going to find out what it is, and you do know that you're going to see at least a semi-happy ending for Susanna because she is writing this. But I think the more interesting thing about this book was just her experiences, and specifically her experience of having to piece together this novel, because there was quite a big part of time during this month that she cannot remember at all. So she had to do interviews with her friends and family, she had to do an interview with her doctors and nurses, and it's really interesting to see how she pieced this all together and what her symptoms were and what happened to her and what the trajectory of this sickness was, but also like how she wrote this book later. I found it a really interesting and captivating memoir nonfiction. It is a memoir, but again, it's also like a journalistic exploration of this phenomenon that happened to her because she doesn't remember everything. I also really liked that it was kind of journalistic. She is a journalist, so it does have a mix of being physical and emotional to her, but then also kind of a mix of the remove of being a journalist and reporting on this event. It's a pretty harrowing story as well. There's definitely a lot of scary elements to it, and there's definitely a lot of intriguing elements that are, not fun to read about, but are interesting. So if you're squeamish about that kind of thing, if you don't like medical stuff, I definitely would not recommend this one. But if you are interested in that, I would. I struggled a little bit with the casual privilege that Susanna has. She has a support system, she has parents with money, she has places to go, people who help her, and a lot of people in this situation or similar situations probably don't. I was getting nervous that it wasn't going to be addressed at all, but there is a little portion at the end where Susanna does address this. I think it could have been more addressed, and I think it could have been more intertwined with the story, because it is shocking how much money was spent on her and how privileged she was to get the treatments that she did get. And obviously she is a young, beautiful white woman, so that lends its own privilege, not to mention that she has a wealthy family and has money of her own, has health insurance. So I wish there was a little bit more of that interwoven, and I think if this book were written later, there might have been. This book was published in 2012. So I think if this book were published today, there would be a little bit more in-depth discussion of the privilege that she had and of the possibility of what would happen to her if she did not have those privileges. I think there would probably also just be a little bit more discussion of how difficult just getting the healthcare that she needed would be, because it has changed a lot in those 13 years, 14 years. But overall, I really did enjoy it, and I'm glad that I've read it. I've had this one on my radar and on my TBR since before 2022, and I'd heard about this one a lot in my early booktube explorations, so I was glad to finally read it. It read really quickly, so if you are interested in a quick medical memoir, if you are interested in like how the brain works and how madness occurs, I would definitely pick this up. I think this also goes along with things like The Man Who Mistook His Wife for a Hat and Darkness Visible, and a book that I read earlier this month, The Diving Bell and the Butterfly, of like people's medical experience with both mental and physical health. Like, I think this goes right along with all those other books, and it's definitely worth the read, again, partly because it is very quick and engaging. So those were all the books that I read in October. Like I said, very many less, half the amount that I read the previous month, but that is totally okay and still quite a lot of books. I did have a lot of books that I really, really liked this month. I have a lot of books that I think I would reread, or I would at least keep on my shelf with the possibility of rereading. I only read 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I only read 8 books physically, so I had quite a bunch of books that were not on my physical TBR, but I did get through some books that I've had for quite a while. I read a bunch of very new books that I got this year. I read several nonfiction books. I read several novellas. I read quite a bit of translated work this month, which is awesome. I read some of my favorite authors. I read new authors that I'll definitely be reading from again. I read kind of sexy books. I read science fiction books. I read works by people of color. So overall, yeah, just a great, great, great reading month, and super happy with everything that I read and looking forward to November. Like I said, it's November 6th today, so I have definitely already started my reading, but I am reading slowly again, similar to October, which is absolutely fine by me. I do need to think about what I'm going to be doing for wrap-ups going forward. These wrap-ups are getting very long. I mean, this one was a little shorter because I only had 12 books, but if I read more than that, my wrap-ups are getting kind of long. So if you have any ideas of what I should do for wrap-ups in the future, definitely let me know. Also, let me know if you've read any of the books that I read here. Let me know what you thought of them. Thanks so much for joining me today, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye! Japan and Japanese folklore and fairy tale and history. What the fuck's going on over there? Are you sneezing?